Meanwhile, there's a new guest essay out this morning in the New York Times that's highlighting the real possibility of election chaos next month and spells out what that might look like. Let's bring in the author of that new opinion piece, former acting U.S. Solicitor General and MSNBC legal analyst, Neal Katyal. Neal, good to see you this morning. So, election 3 weeks away, but we know there are already some efforts underway to sow doubt as to its results, those efforts only to accelerate. Please tell us more about what the chaos you fear may come.
Yeah, I think we are looking at a very possible constitutional crisis, and one that's going to make January 6, 2021 look like a dress rehearsal. And this year, the rogues have had 4 years to go pro and perfect the big lie. And so I wrote this piece. I think it's the most important piece I've ever written, because I'm really wanting to warn the American people about what very well may happen on November 5th and then the days to come. And we shouldn't be surprised when Donald Trump sends out his lawyers to challenge everything. I mean, that's what they did in 2020. The vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, couldn't even admit that Trump lost in 2020. And remember, in 2020, Biden won 306 electoral votes to Trump's 232. So all of his 60 different challenges he filed, he had to run the table and win a bunch of them. This election might be closer. So I'm very, very worried about these possibilities.
Neal, I agree that this is such an important piece, and we have to think about the aftermath of the election just as much as the actual election. What happens if there is chaos at the actual polling centers in major cities, in places like Philadelphia or Milwaukee or Maricopa County on Election Day, and those results are then, aspersions are cast on what those results are if there's chaos at the site?
Yeah, and those aspersions can be cast in a variety of ways by the Trump team. So he could try and go to court, as he did in 2020, and try and say, throw out the votes, discount them. They could go to state election boards, as they've just tried to empower Georgia to do, local boards to try and throw out election results. They could go to state governors and say, hey, this count is wrong. You got to send a different fake slate of electors or something like that. And most importantly, they could go to the United States Congress on January 6, 2025 this time, and say to the Congress, you need to throw out these state electoral slates because they're procured by fraud or the like. And it's just a simple majority of the House and Senate that can try and stop that can enact that and strike a state from the Electoral College. And Congress in 2022, in something called the Electoral Count Reform Act, tried to modify this a bit, and they did a good job. But there is a cottage industry of Republican strategists who are trying to, end that act and eliminate its protections.
Neal, Georgia is, to my knowledge, the only swing state that has a Republican governor. And I just wonder if you could talk us through a little bit where your concerns are around kind of this path to not accepting the election results that would involve fake electors. Is it a state legislature that would be responsible for essentially throwing out Democratic results? Because, for example, in Georgia, the governor of Georgia, Kemp, has said he plans to stand up for democracy. So what exactly does that pathway look like? Is it state legislatures where your area of most concern is? Talk us through that.
It's elsewhere, but state legislatures is certainly a part. And remember, Donald Trump in 2020 tried to use state legislatures to appoint fake slates of electors. We've had two good things happen in the years since 2020. One is a Supreme Court case called Moore versus Harper, which rejected a lot of this whole state legislature nonsense. And the other is that 22 Act of Congress, which gave governors the power, not state legislatures, the power to send a slate of electors to Washington, D.C. The problem is that some people think that act is unconstitutional. Trump will certainly make those kinds of arguments. And, there's a general feeling that it's not just state governors or legislatures, it's also state courts. And some of them are elected. They're they run on partisan platforms. And ordinarily, we've been able to rely on two things to prevent these nightmare scenarios. One is the good faith of political candidates and political parties, be it a Republican or Democrat. Nobody kind of believed this election hoax nonsense. You had people like Al Gore, who, when the Supreme Court ruled against him, said, fine, I'll accept it. Fine, it's over. Trump is not that way. And the second thing that's happened is that you have really now a playbook that has been perfected by over the last 4 years by the Republicans to use any means available: states, state courts, state legislatures, state governors, or the U.S. Congress. So basically, the democracy folks have to run the table and hold each of these different institutions after November 5th. The best way to do that, of course, is to have something like a blowout in the Electoral College, the way Biden did in 2020, so that Trump would have to effectively run the table in battleground state over battleground state with his legal challenges.
Yeah, the two battleground states, the Republican governors, Georgia and Nevada. Neal, I want to get you, as a last question, to weigh in on a scenario that Brendan Buck put out for us a couple of hours ago, that Harris wins, Republicans hang on narrowly to the House. So that's a plausible scenario. And then the House is then seated on January 3rd. Mike Johnson going to try to become Speaker again. Brendan floated the fear that Johnson's going to be held hostage, if you will, by some Republicans who are going to say to him, I'm not going to give you a vote for Speaker if you say you'll certify Kamala Harris's victory. And, of course, the January 6th certification deadline just a few days later. If that were to occur, what happens next?
Yeah, it depends exactly on how the objection is laid out on January 6th. There are some objections that Congress has suggested don't eliminate the denominator in the Electoral College. And there are others that do. This gets really, really complicated. My op-ed today tries to tease some of this out. But the bottom line is that you could have a circumstance in which there's a tie in the Electoral College because Johnson is throwing out certain votes, and then that would throw the whole thing to the House of Representatives under the 12th Amendment, under totally arcane voting rules where it's not a majority of the House, it's a majority of the states in the House. And things could get really, really unwieldy really fast. And as I say, it's been American principle, American honor, the integrity of the parties that has prevented any of these scenarios in our lifetimes. But that appears to have broken down in the Republican Party, which is now really entrenched in the big lie, not just in 2020, but looks like they're gearing up for one in 2024.
Yeah, the big lie remains dogma for so many Republicans. The important new piece bears the headline, "The Trump team is prepared to bring election chaos. Here's what voters need to know." It's online now. For the New York Times, former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neal Katyal, thank you so much for being on this morning.